All right. Great to see everybody. So we've still got people joining. Give everybody another minute. All right. Lexi, you said we'd get going about a minute after, all right?
Yeah, we'll give everyone a couple minutes or a minute or two to trickle in here, and then we'll get started.
Great. Everybody's excited. All right.
Alrighty, guys. I think we can get started here. So thank you all for joining today, our Future Proof Your Pricing Strategic Moves in Uncertain Times webinar. Few tips for today. Our panel is very conversational, so feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and our panel will get to them throughout the webinar or at the end. Moderator today is Amy Julian, partner in our strategy and transformation team. So I'm going to kick it over to Amy, and she will talk about our agenda and our panelists. Over to you, Amy.
Awesome. And before we get started, if you flip to the next slide, David, just a reminder, if you guys do have questions, we definitely want to make this conversational, and that includes anybody in the audience. And so if you have questions, please log them in the Q&A box. We will work to kind of incorporate those into the discussion as much as we can. All right, let's dig in and go to a quick introduction. So Alexa, thank you for my introduction. Super excited to have an awesome team here today. They all have different kind of areas of expertise, bring different perspectives to the conversation. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. David?
Yeah, so David Sanders, I've been with Armanino doing consulting for the last 4 years. Prior to that, I had about 15 years of experience across pricing, FP&A, sales finance, finance for organizations in the large CPG food and beverage space, and then did a turn in contracts and pricing management for a aerospace manufacturer. So a varied history of stuff that has always kept me on kind of the FP&A and pricing side. So for those of you familiar, the revenue growth management area, and that's what I lead consulting engagements on now for large and small. So thanks for the floor, Amy.
All right, Agnes.
Hi, my name is Agnes. I work in our corporate and restructuring. So we basically help clients that are experiencing any kind of cash distress. We help them through turnarounds or restructuring. Prior to consulting in restructuring and turnarounds, I did 7 years with a Fortune 500 consumer products company, specifically in global pricing.
Well, Travis.
Yeah, hi, I'm Travis Christians. I've been here with Armanino almost 2 years now. Prior to that, I was a financial system administrator and director for a healthcare software company for 15 years, doing everything from web development to data and data engineering, data warehousing, etc. But here I focus on really just helping people centralize their data, understand their data, do more analytics, and start to present AI opportunities for them with their data after centralized and cleansed. So that's me.
Awesome. And last, but certainly not least, Stephen.
Yeah, hello, everybody. So I'm the new kid on the block. So I've been with Armanino about 2 months, but I come from a background of about 15 years of working across the data and AI space, both from a delivery perspective, so kind of helping organizations get and make sense of a trove of data, and then now currently more as a solution architect, so having conversations with organizations trying to figure out how do we develop the right solution? What does that architecture look like? How do we really take all these things and put them together in a way that makes sense and leverage that for AI or for other things? So happy to join in.
Great. Awesome. So we've got, a couple of slides, but again, we're trying to make this conversational. We've got a lot of people who represent both the process, how do you actually put together a strategy in place, but also how do you use technology kind of behind this? So you go to the next slide, we can kind of talk about all of these different things. And again, if you've got questions along the way, please raise your hand and we'll get going. All right, so My first question then, David, is for you. Like, let's just level set. Explain the basics of pricing. How do most organizations think about that? And as you're explaining that, we're going to launch a quick poll, and we'd like to just get some audience feedback of what you guys do today.
Yeah, so I would say that when we talk about organizations doing pricing, one of the very first things we have to dispel is that there are known tenets that have particular vocabularies that help you strip apart the different elements of pricing. Pricing, a lot of times people think of it like a big tangled up ball of Christmas lights in the garage, that all these elements go into it in one big thing, when really you can actually make it much, much easier on yourself by stripping out different elements that lead to the eventual pricing that you provide to your customers, right? That's usually the first piece, is teaching them on what are the elements of pricing. And then the second part is teaching them that it's okay if we don't do every last bit of it. The trick is to figure out, knowing those tenets, what fits you in the role that you are in your industry, the capabilities you have, the teams and resources you have at your disposal. It's finding the right match to make those things come alive. That's usually where we start with people. So it's a lot of discovery about what do you have in place, what don't you have in place, and what do you understand about the pricing process, and what are you ready to tackle? It doesn't have to be one big bang. You can put elements in place that have very big benefits pretty immediately. That's one of the best things about an investment into the pricing area. It usually is a very low cost investment in order to get fairly immediate and fairly high returns, because it usually turns on behaviors you can put into place right away, and it doesn't require a lot of other changes. So,
all right, so it looks like we got the poll results. Does any of that surprise you, David, when you're looking at that?
No, hearing people that are all across the board with varying levels of structure in place, understanding of this, and then sometimes some of the questions on here that are inefficient, right? We see a lot of clients that are like, I'm inefficient by design. I want more stuff coming across my desk so that I have a higher degree of control. And that's a thing that we can talk about. So no, the fact that it's almost exactly separated here is kind of exactly what we would expect to see.
Cool. And I know I hear a lot about like value-based pricing, cost-based pricing. Why don't you take us through, like, what does that mean? Like, how does it actually get applied in practice?
Yeah, so when we think about this is kind of a simple one that we use to help talk clients through kind of this is one element we talk to them about, of what's the market you're playing in, right? What is your level of awareness? But when we talk about cost plus, you've kind of hit on, it always starts with knowing yourself, right? Knowing what your cost is, knowing how you allocate costs, thinking about fixed costs and marginal costs, so you have a good background against which you're going to choose to do the pricing you're going to do. Right. Those are the things that you get in place. But then on something like this, we talk about what sort of data is available to you when you start going into the marketplace, right? How much do you know about it? I've worked for large organizations and consulted for large organizations that pay a lot of money to somebody like an AC Nielsen, Circana now, right? That says, here's very defined data sets for all the retailers and all the products that you're going into. That's a highly transparent marketplace. So that would be up at the very top right of this one. Alternatively, when I was in aerospace, it falls somewhere in the middle. Most of the time, you don't have any visibility to where your price offer is landing versus your competition. Every now and then, though, you respond to a publicly available RFP where we do get a nugget of that, right? And how does your organization be ready to take those few and far between nuggets of what the marketplace looks like and put them into a broader context that you can apply, right? I think Travis can actually talk about some of where that's becoming easier to do with some of the advances in technology and AI. But then all the way on the lower left side of it is where you have a fully opaque marketplace, and you're left to really rely on what you know internally. So in here, what I'd say is that lower left, you'd be talking about focusing more on what your cost is and what you feel like your required margin above that cost has to be, because that's all the information you have. If you have more transparent data, you have more degrees of freedom to start making more subtle decisions with, right? I can disconnect my pricing because I understand the value prop for the market. So understanding where you fall in these things is very important.
So one of the topics that is coming up a lot is tariffs, right? Like, so it's been a little bit of a lull. Everybody's kind of feeling like, okay, do we have a bit of an equilibrium? But it was pretty chaotic there for a little period of time. Lots of people were asking, like, how do I account for this? How do I adjust my pricing? What have you seen, or what would you recommend, David?
The number one thing that we tell people is you're going to be successful if you treat it as an opportunity, not a threat, right? There's tariffs is the latest example of I need to know my business so that I understand how this thing that's happening in the marketplace, and it could be anything, impacts me so that then I can decide what to do about it, right? So understanding my cost structure and if these tariffs come in, where am I going to get hit with? Most people skipped right to that area and said, what am I going to get hit with? And I kind of made the joke that we had a number of people that kind of subtly communicated how well they do or don't know their business when they would say, hey, can you tell me how this is going to impact me? And the exhibit I made was that's kind of like saying, hey, can you lift these weights for me so I get stronger? It doesn't work like that, right? You have to know your business inside and out so that you can say, okay, if I'm getting hit with this, does it help me more to take pricing? And should I do that across my full portfolio, including the things that don't get hit by tariffs so that I can spread that so it's not as big of a pain to the market? Or do I absorb some of this so that I create a bigger price gap versus my competition? And I know more people are going to shift to me and that volume helps me more than the pricing would, right? Those are the conversations that you can start having if you have a good understanding of who you are as a company, right? Your business structure, your cost structure, your customer base, and how they treat you. So those are the things that we usually tell people. The other one that's kind of top of mind sometimes is do I put a line item out there or do I leave it baked into everything? And some of that has to deal with how transparent you're able and willing to be with people, right? If this is something where I just need to cover my cost, and I'm okay with going back to my profit and pricing where I was before when that tariff rolls off, then sure, go show it as a line item and show people, hey, full transparency, I'm passing this through to you. It takes the question of whether they're going to pay for it almost zero, right? The alternative would be maybe I don't want to roll back all of that. Maybe in the future, I'm going to pass through 100% of what I get hit on tariffs. Those tariffs go away, and I'm going to roll back 75% of it to create some profit margin because I've got other parts of my business that have inflated in cost. Those are conversations you can be ready for if you know your business. And Agnes, you've seen kind of the other side of this more from the people who maybe didn't have that in place. Do you want to talk for a minute about kind of what one of my big things is the earlier you address this, the more options are at your disposal. You can see people that are kind of on the other side of that if you want to talk to it for a minute.
Absolutely. So, David, I think you make a really good point about this know your business. Oftentimes, unfortunately, by the time clients come to see us, they're already experiencing cash distress, and we have to go in there to figure out what created this issue. The market has been challenging even before tariffs became the buzzword. We were seeing inflation at a rate that was unprecedented. There were issues with rising interest rates that were challenges for a lot of companies. And so tariffs is just another challenge that is making people take a look at what is affecting their costs. But like you said, it can be an opportunity. And when we are at a point of coming to see our clients, what we find is that a lot of our clients don't know their business. So they thought that they had the information that they need to make decisions. But in digging through what created the moments of distress, we find that they actually don't have that information. So understanding your business, your data, and what contributes to your costs is so integral. And without that sort of base really that aren't being made in any kind of strategic way.
Well, super helpful, guys. Anything else like on tariffs or just current market conditions and what we should be getting ahead of?
In terms of the market condition, it has been challenging across the industries. I think most the industries that are most affected are product. In 2024, we saw bankruptcies numbers that haven't been as large since 2028. And so the number of companies that are experiencing distress, whether it be for a multiple, is on the rise. Now, recently, definitely tariffs are the buzzword, and companies like At Home, Mariella, these are recent bankruptcies that have specifically cited tariffs. But as you look into what led up to those bankruptcies, it's not just tariffs. There are other operational issues, other outside factors that are contributing. So it's definitely could be the needle that broke the camel's back, but there are other factors at play that are affecting really all companies.
Yeah. Super
And then the
easy.
only other thing I'd add is that I think what has become clear is that it's going to be a much longer timeline until there is certainty to the tariff piece, right? So whereas some people were probably sitting on the sidelines waiting to see how it's going to shake out, I think the smarter companies are now hitting a point where they're saying the timeline to when I have clarity is too long. I have to go start doing stuff. Otherwise, I'm just guaranteeing that I'm going to be behind my competitors that do move. And so what we're seeing is a shift that maybe they're continuing to put the things that are dependent on tariffs on hold, right? So CapEx investments or longer term stuff in that nature. But what we are seeing people go deploy money against is the stuff that is kind of more evergreen and not going to be specifically have an ROI impacted by tariffs, right? I'm going to go figure out how to go improve my cash flow. I'm going to make investments in, my bandwidth and capability here domestically because I need that under any scenario, right? The types of things that they can do that improves their core business and aren't reliant on tariffs, we're seeing that kind of saying, okay, if I don't have control over some of the things about tariffs and I can't model that out, let me go prioritize making a good investment on the things that I do have a higher degree of certainty on.
And I always feel like, I mean, way back when I was in my undergrad as an economics major, like we talk about pricing elasticity, right? Like how is your price going to impact like the demand for your product and your service, whatever that might be. And I feel like that's where I've been hearing a lot of uncertainty from our clients. Travis, I'd love to kind of hear from you. How do you start to see like data and modeling and insights being able to better inform even smaller mid-sized companies of where those elasticities might really be?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a couple of different paths. Sometimes people look at the systems that they have in place and maybe some of the AI elements and the centralization of the data to that system, helping them that data within the system. So if we were talking about Dynamics CRM, you might have things that will help you do AI-driven chatbots to do real-time pricing inquiries, or you might have other types of analysis like the automated budget components that they have with generative AI in there. But if it's not system specific, then the other path that people are looking at is more of the data warehousing type of mindset. So in the past, data warehousing was all about centralizing your data and getting it easier to do business intelligence and reporting on it. But now it's even more important because when you start talking about AI and generative AI, and machine learning models and some of the more advanced things that you can do with your data, having that data centralized, cleansed, and formatted in the right structure will lead to better outcomes. And so we're seeing a lot more interest right now in people prepping their data for these initial questions that they have about their pricing strategy as well as other things. But then, once you have that centralized, you can start to look at doing things like what if scenarios off of your data. And you can use things like Power BI or even Copilot or Copilot Studio or Dataverse connectors to get at that data and to do those what if scenarios to extend your data further. So that's kind of an internal mindset. And then you have your external mindset. What are the things that are happening in the market that will lead me to better data-driven decisions? That might be some, like David was talking about, there might be curated data sources out there that you can access that will give you more information about competitor pricing or average pricing, or, maybe that data set for your industry doesn't exist. And then you start leading into, well, where can I find data about that? And you might lead to using generative AI to help you with some of the development to do things like web scraping or extracting data from hosted Excel files or financial statements of competitors or suppliers. That kind of stuff might lead you to better decision making on the impact you have or that's on you from all of that data or those decisions that are being made outside of your organization. So what we're seeing is a lot of the internal consolidation of your data, centralization and cleansing of it for better generative AI and reporting and analytics. But we're also seeing people utilize a lot of the generative AI and connectors and APIs that are out there now more than ever to bring that data externally into their holistic data repository to make holistic, better data-driven decisions.
Yeah, it's just, there's so much opportunity out there to use data AI to kind of help with this. But, David, I want to kind of come back to you to kind of wrap this all up. How do you really start to rethink like the pricing strategy, right? Like, how would you say like, hey, I know there's something maybe I need to do differently. What's some of those initial things that they should think about?
Yeah. So when I mentioned earlier, and I'll share a slide here, right? When I mentioned earlier about helping people kind of strip apart the different elements of pricing, these are, if I had to paint broad buckets, these are what I usually go with, right? And the very first thing that I start with is what is kind of from the top down, what are the things that we want to be true? A lot of these are, especially for companies on the smaller side or in the middle market, where we don't have dedicated teams, we don't have resources. It's being managed by some group of cross-functional people, usually say some combination of sales, marketing, and finance, right? One of the conversations we have is taking price and cost leading to profit as one aspect. What are the other aspects that you would be willing to sacrifice a little bit of profit for, right? What are those other things of value to you that could be either strategic in nature or very important from kind of intangible perspectives, or in the case of finance, right? I might be willing to trade straight pricing if I get better payment terms because it helps my cash flow and that's a priority to me, right? But having a conversation that starts stripping apart what are the different things that are important to us that go into the pricing process, right? That's the first part. The second part is then we talk with clients about okay, are you showing a desire to get serious, as I call it? I want to have a dedicated person to talk about pricing. I'm not going to make it a when I can make time for it exercise, right? Do you want to talk about it on a recurring quarterly basis? Do you want to set up some reporting that shows me where my pricing is, right? Those are the types of things that we start talking about when we say how informal or formal do we want to do it. And I do those first two buckets first because it sets the table for what we would go put in place along the next two buckets, which if you go follow pricing, these are the two most kind of academically termed things, gross pricing and net pricing. Gross pricing has to say, what is my list price? Or before I start any deal making or discounting, what is my price that I would charge for somebody? And we a lot of times have to walk people through the cost structure and what is an acceptable cost plus starting point that they'd start with. When would they make changes to it? How would they make changes to it? Who can make changes to it? Those types of conversations come into play on the gross pricing side. Then as you move to net pricing, this is where I go back to the stuff that we defined in number one. Okay, what are the other things that we're willing to discount our price for? And when? How big of a customer do you have to be? How do you have, a volume purchase threshold where I allow people to get better discounting because my cost structure changes? This is where we see bundling discounts and other things like that. Those are the conversations you lead on the net pricing side. And you close that off by saying, okay, it's great that we've identified the subjective, what are the things? Now let's talk about how much do I do it? What are my right levels where I feel good saying this is the level of discounting? And one of the conversations I have with people here is that you want to put things in place that when your salespeople usually are having conversations with their customers and the customer says, I don't like that, sales can come right back to them and say, okay, well, if you can do A, B, or C, I can get you better price. And by doing that, we've identified 3 other paths that a customer can take in order to get better pricing, all of which I've already defined how much I'll discount my price, and I know that it works in my favor. And the nice part is, even if they say no to that, you've set the table where they feel like the price that they're now going to get is a path they chose because they didn't want to choose any of the other paths. And so it all is geared towards making that final conversation with customers more digestible and easy to understand and more transparent. And then the last one is based on all the things that we put in place, what are the success metrics or KPIs and analytics that we're going to go use in order to track this stuff? And one of the important parts here is that I do tend to talk with people about behaviors, which are the inputs or causals, and then the outputs, right? I can measure both because I don't always get the results I want, even when I do things the right way. And so you want to have some tracking that measures both. Am I working the work correctly and doing the things that we think are going to lead to good outcomes? And then how are my outcomes coming through? So this is a bit of a long answer to what you asked, Amy, but when I talk people through this is what we go through. And then we start saying, where do we start with? Where are your problems? Where are your strengths? And that's how we start chipping away at it.
And it's fair to say, like, having some sort of pricing reporting is a good place to start, right? Like,
Yes.
So if you don't have some sort of information about where that lies, like just getting that documented is a great starting point. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll show something in a few slides that I teed up if we have time for it. That is, I had an economic going back to my teacher, right? They said it doesn't have to be perfect math, but a little bit of math can go a long way, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of the easy things you can do that can start showing you where your areas of opportunity are? So.
Yeah. And we've got a poll and quiz out there right now just to kind of see, again, assuming you are doing some level of pricing analysis, what do you have out there already? Like, what are you capturing and what do you have available to see? So If you get a chance, please respond to that.
Yeah, and this I do a lot of my consulting, talking with people who are on the FP&A side, investing in tech tools. And one of the conversations we have is what does your data structure look like behind it, and are you ready for it? And that comes into play on the reporting side also, which is usually right behind. Okay, this is the reporting I want. The next question is, great, where does that data exist and what does it look like? And that usually is not a pleasant conversation for a lot of companies, but you can talk with Travis, right? It's usually the prerequisite class to getting to some of the very cool, big, shiny object stuff that Travis can talk you through, right? And that he spends his time implementing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's extremely important too to talk about, because a lot of the time people get a little gun shy about, oh, this is going to take years to clean my data, right? What's most important is we identify what are the key things that we're trying to get out of, what questions are we trying to answer, what are the KPIs that we're trying to focus on, and doing more of an agile approach to developing those solutions instead of trying to do this big bang enterprise-wide data warehouse design practice, because you effectively will miss the boat on the challenges real time, right? You're just going to be reacting at that point. So it's very important that you take an agile, fast, rapid development approach to any of these reporting or data centralization projects. And then what I like to tell people is fail fast, right? If you do something and it's not working, quickly pivot. Fail, accept failure, accept the fact that it's not working, take the learnings from that and move on to the next initiative or move on to the next approach so that you're not sitting there spinning your wheels for months on end trying to cleanse your data.
And it can be, like you said, very agile, very small. Agnes, I know a lot of times, like, you don't have the luxury of building anything kind of fancy. What are some of the lessons that you've really learned, and does this kind of resonate with you?
Absolutely. Oftentimes when we're in a situation, in order to identify the issue, we do have to look at the data. And unfortunately for a lot of companies, for whatever reason, whether it be their size, their resources, where they are in terms of maturity, we don't find that they have good data. And you don't know what you don't know. Sometimes we go to the basics and we go down to bank statements to understand what is actually happening with the cash in their organization. So having basic visibility into what is their cash in, cash out? What are the costs? What are we doing in terms of what's coming into the company and what's leaving the company? It's incredibly basic, but that has to start somewhere and it has to be good. And if you don't have good data, then you're not making any decisions and you are just acting blindly. And we have found that in our clients. And unfortunately, that's what gets them to that point of distress. We talked a lot about being reactive. A lot of times when you're at a point of distress, you don't have the luxury of making decisions and being proactive. You are at a point where your lender, your investors are kind of forcing you to the point where we need someone to step in because we don't have a runway. So having basic visibility into data is important, and we start there. And I mean, we would love our clients to have the ability to do the analysis that Travis is capable of, but we just start with basic data in Excel to normalize information and make it readable, reportable, and able to inform decisions that make sense for the organization. We talk about, David touched upon all the different ways and strategies in which pricing is approached. A thing that our clients are asked is, does their product and their pricing support their business? Is it viable to support their business? And if it isn't, then what are the things that need to be, what are the levers that can be changed in order to support that business? So it's, again, down to know your business and understand what those levers are. On top of, once you've got the data, do you fully understand your cost components? A lot of times, because of the complexity, whether it is separate entities, different brands, there are costs that are hidden that aren't apparent to, and sometimes really normalizing information is not as automatic as it should be for a lot of organizations. And so sometimes we come in and we do that manually in order to look at apples to apples. And it's that kind of comparison in data that hides a lot of those costs. And management is asking, we don't know where our money is going. Another big thing is sales and marketing talking to finance? sometimes they are so siloed, they're working completely separately. And sales is saying we have to be positioned this way because of these outside factors. But does that make sense in terms of our bottom line? Is finance overseeing that, and do they have a say? So communication between those functions is incredibly important. When I was work specifically in pricing at the corporate level, my job was to actually force finance and marketing to come to the table and have those discussions. And sometimes it does take someone to force them to have this discussion, but it's so important because, and I can show this later in a example, when those discussions don't happen, things can go south very quickly and you can start losing a lot of money.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that. I mean, so what you guys are talking about though, like this is tactically feasible. Like even if you haven't looked at the data, like that's there somewhere. You can usually get it. It might take a little effort, whether it's in Excel or you start to kind of move up the chain. So like, why is this hard? I know you guys have thought on what are some of those common challenges, but would love to hear from all three of you, like what are some of those difficulties that we see our clients experiencing when they're trying to figure out pricing?
Yeah, go ahead, Travis.
Yeah, it's interesting because what Agnes was just talking about is extremely important as far as like extracting the data and centralizing it, and those steps are typically challenging to identify those sources. A lot of the time, it'll be like, oh, my system's a black box, right? I don't know how to get data out of my system, or I only know how to access the data through the UI in the system. And a lot of the time when that happens, you can't extend that data. You can't include additional metadata from other sources. Maybe you're looking at ERP data, but you don't have your CRM data. Or maybe you have a series of Excel spreadsheets because those Excel spreadsheets and the data retained in those Excel spreadsheets don't fit anywhere easily in your systems that you own. And so when you're talking about that initial extraction of data, what we do is we do that manual approach. That gives you that great starting point of what should we be looking at? What do we tie to? And then from there, a lot of the time, our clients and other companies that I've worked with in the past, they hit a wall, right? They do that initial, and then they can't figure out how to automate it or how to do incremental loads of that information or how to streamline and schedule it to be run every week or day or whatever. And so that's where I've seen a lot of challenges with clients is they get that first step done, and maybe they partner with somebody to get that first step done, and then they just don't know how to take it to that next level and to have that routine review experience going on. So that I think that's the biggest challenge that I've seen.
Yeah, I would echo some of that on the data side, Travis. Especially, I see it very often when people are talking about the FP&A front. But a lot of people always say, "I want to get out of Excel," and one of the questions is, "Do you really?" Because for all of its warts, Excel covers up a lot of little sins, right? Don't have to exactly match. Things don't have to work perfectly. A lot of times this is where we see finance or accounting people kind of absorb making things kind of tie together on the back end by pulling data from one system, manipulating it slightly so it matches up with another system. Those are the types of things that Travis is talking about that are kind of to be taken care of before you're ready to kind of go to that next level of analysis that he wants. When you talk about disjointed systems, does A in this system equal A in this system when it's carrying the same name? A lot of times that answers, it equals almost A. Well, that works in Excel. It doesn't work in a lot of systems, right? Now, some of that is becoming easier to solve with AI, but it's still there, right? It's a friction point. And then to Agnes's point before, I'd also harp on a few of these of no strategy and siloed departments and whatnot. As a consultant for the last 4 years, I have always been amazed how much of the value is sometimes brought purely by having an excuse for all the leaders of the different areas of an organization to get around a table and talk about a particular issue, and how much that solves. Letting people talk to each other with a structure in place about what is the problem to solve, what are the arms that lead into that, and how do we go address them. The amount of problems that get solved by doing that is surprisingly high. And so if I'm thinking of messages I would like to get across to people is don't wait to go do that. Pick a problem, pick a structure to it and get your teams together to say, hey, we're going to carve out 2 hours, kill your rest of your calendar, shut off your phones, shut off your email, and let's have a robust talk about this cross-functionally. That's a really good place to start, because if nothing else, it'll tell you where you have alignment on solving a problem versus where you don't and you need help. That can be a very, very helpful exercise. So,
And that's something you facilitate, David. Have you seen
all
that
the time.
go pretty well? So,
All the time. We include that as, generally speaking, that is discussion number one after we kick off a project, is we get a intentionally cross-functional team. And if you ever work with us and try to tell us, well, no, I want to solve this within finance first before I take it to my cross-functional partners, I will generally fight people tooth and nail on that one before we say, okay, that's fine. The point is, get more of those voices and concerns and perspectives around the table, and you can have a much more robust piece. We have facilitation ways to draw out prioritization against that stuff when we have a lot of conflicting things, but get them out there. So err on the side of inviting more cross-functional people, not less, allowing more things on the table, not less, and then figure out how to pare them down and sequence them and whatnot later. But yeah, we do that. That is the beginning of every project we do whenever we can steer it that way.
looking at these kind of common challenges, what would be like your most common one that you see when you're talking to your clients?
Well, so I think that, first of all, the reactive mindset is really what we often see, and it's kind of what has landed them to a point where they are in distress. And so I think it starts from there, but I think all of these common challenges, again, can be opportunities because it's laying out what you can do to fix these issues. So the reactive mindset is, of course, when you have disjointed systems, that kind of makes apparent the issue with data. But a lot of companies, especially in the middle market and small space, they are working off of Excel. Now, unfortunately, Excel is driven by humans. And with that kind of reporting, you have to make sure that that's also being audited. Oftentimes, we will see beautiful models with great Excel, but we're asking management what they are getting out of this information. And they can't say, or they not getting what they need out of the information. And so we ask, well, why haven't we modified this to suit your needs? And oftentimes the answer is, well, because that's not how it's been done. So, and that's not a great answer. They need to be looking at this and being proactive and not reactive. They have to be on top of this. And that's the same issue with being reactive to these outside variables. You want to be able to control what you can control so that you are able to be ready for those outside factors, whether it be interest rates, inflation, or tariffs. So I would say being proactive is most important. But it is very difficult for organizations that have limited resources, which is why I think that bringing in an outside party with a different perspective is always healthy for the organization.
Yeah, and from the Excel standpoint, one of the things that people kind of gravitate towards is if you go the data-centric route and you do a data warehouse and you do all this machine learning model, it's all going to be buried in an IT team, and we can't access that data only the way that the IT group wants us to access it, whether it's, Power BI reports or Tableau or name another reporting tool, right? Here's the thing. Excel still can connect to those data sets. You can still extend that data from your data warehouse, your centralized repository with your own manual data. You just need help. And that's where when David was talking about, like, create those cross-functional areas and make sure that you're not just working in a silo. Bring your IT staff in. Don't let IT drive the decisions, but help IT enable you on the path that you need. And Excel is always going to be one of the reporting tools in your stack, whether you centralize and cleanse and extend your data or not. And so it's really just important that you create things like data connections, or maybe you want to use or if you're using Office 365, you might be using JavaScript or TypeScript to extend it, but you can add the data from your central repository back into Excel to keep manipulating it. And here's the wonderful part about this. You add it into your data warehouse, you extend it with Excel. Guess what? Your IT team can bring that data in Excel back into the data warehouse. You can create the circular nature of extending and enhancing your data over and over and over again to get better data-driven decisions out of that information.
I could talk data all day, Travis. It's so exciting to like kind of see what's out there and going. I'd actually like to kind of have maybe David, you show us like, how does this show up in reality, right? Like because you've done a couple of these analysis, like help make it real. Like what does this look like when you talk to different customers?
Yeah, I alluded to this earlier, but there's some very basic tenets that almost everybody's familiar with in pricing, right? The idea of buy more, save more. If you're willing to buy larger quantities of stuff, I can give you a better price because I have economy of scale or things. Strategically important decisions. When do we choose to do that and not? What is our trend over time of our cost of goods versus our trend over time of our top line? All those sorts of things can come into place. So here's an example, right? So this is one that usually when we start talking with people, what I ask for is I say, give me by product, by customer sales information. Show me for the transactions they did, what was the price at which you sold it to them? And one of the basic tests is not that it always needs to be the case, but right, are my biggest customers getting some of my better pricing, or do I have some very small noise that maybe is getting pricing that you as a leader of an organization doesn't want them having access to because you don't like the idea of a big person finding out just how good of pricing somebody else that's smaller got, right? That's a hidden risk for people. So this is one that we do. And very simply, this is one where we rank the customers in terms of size. So on this chart, the biggest customers are to the left. And then we said, pick a particular product and what price did those customers get? And each one of these is a transaction, right? And so these are same test, 3 different clients, takes about 4 hours of work to tee this up. A couple of them are in Excel, a couple of them are in Power BI, depending on who we're working with. But they show you 3 different problems to solve for these 3 different clients, right? The first one is truly a scatter plot. They don't have any of that gross pricing structure in place. There's not it looks like it's almost hard to find a true maximum price we would charge people. And then from top to bottom, it doesn't appear there's any rhyme or reason to what price we're giving them. And when you go ask more details about this, what we found out is, yes, it's entirely at the salespeople's discretion on what price they want to offer people. They're aiming to balance their business on a target margin, and this is the result that you have. You could be happy with that. You could not be happy with that. I think they're leaving profit on the table. And we talked about that with this client. Client number 2 is a slightly different example, right? They appear to have very good gross pricing and net pricing in play. We have good price breaks that most people are using. And what we ended up talking about here is that down in the lower left, your very largest customers, which was a decent concentration of their business, that's where the rules started not getting followed as much. And so the conversation with them was, how do we bring some of that structure to the more difficult conversations with our largest clients, right? Client number 3 is one where they have a very good control over what the maximum price is, and they actually have a decent control over a couple of the net prices. And what we talked about here is that big gap between that first line at the top, the second line at the bottom, seems like there would be room to add another margin in there or migrate that second line up a little bit from a net pricing perspective, right? So same test, and you can very quickly determine a couple different things that you could do with this. So there's 5 or 6 different kind of easy tests like this that we usually do to find out what neighborhood we have opportunity in. But this is the sort of work that it takes. And so if you're looking at this and thinking, if you were some of those people that said, hey, my data is not great, which was like half of you, a lot of times this is the first step is we say, okay, where do the elements of this come from? And how do we chip away at getting them available to us in order to put something like this together? So we'll meet you where you are when we go through these from kind of what an engagement looks like. But this is the sort of work that people should be starting to do into their business if they can.
Well, that's super interesting. And it doesn't take a lot. Like if somebody's interested in this is something that we do just to kind of get insights and something that we can do for free if we've worked with you before.
Yeah.
I'd love for you, and you had a couple case studies kind of teed up to help bring it home. Like, what does this actually look like in practice?
Yes. So we are sometimes called the group that the bad news bears because we are always working with clients that are in distress. So here are just some examples of how pricing played a role in where these companies landed or how they addressed or didn't address pricing. We had a client in the tech space, I wouldn't say startup, but definitely in the growth phase. And their focus was very much in sales and marketing, so much that they were almost neglecting the costs of the services that they were providing. And so they got a huge injection of investment, and in a period of 2 months, $20 million was gone and management couldn't account for it. And so we came in to investigate exactly where the cash was going and how is it being spent. We found that 95% of their contracts were not even covering costs. And so absolutely low-hanging fruit in terms of cost pricing there. But what really was allowing this to happen was there was no systems in place to make any of that information viewable, readable, and reportable. So we put in some basic controls to track costs and track billing, because not only were they not correctly priced, they were also not putting in place the ability to collect on those bills. So this is a situation, this was an in and out case that we had done with this organization. And really what that was is stop the bleeding, allow for a bit of runway so that management can take a breath and really start thinking about being strategic in terms of their operations. But the way that they were going, they really weren't doing anything in terms of their pricing to support their business. Another example is manufacturing of sheds. This is a situation where this was reactive. They had asked us to come and address issues of a covenant in default. This was a situation where the company was reacting to inflation and interest rates, but a lot of companies are still dealing with repercussions of COVID. And they had reacted to what was actually a boom during COVID times and started to do expansions. And after COVID ended and things were starting to normalize, they didn't change along with that. And so they were still in that growth, taking advantage of what was an opportunity for growth during COVID. And they had sort of exhausted their price increases. And so that was a situation where they had to look at their operations and look at their data and figure out what other levers could they move in order to help their organization. And another client is an automotive parts where they were gearing up for looking at their pricing. And this is someone that was being proactive. They knew that there was going to be a downturn in the horizon. And so they were not in distress, but they were concerned about their inability to create the types of profit that the investors expected. And so based on the information that they were working with and that they had, they weren't really able to identify why they weren't being profitable and where that money was going. This is a situation where we had to manually normalize data in order to figure out what was being hidden in all their reporting. And we basically identified that there were buried overhead throughout the multiple brands that wasn't basically, there were brands that were just not underperforming and it wasn't apparent because of the shared overhead that was not being considered. And this is a situation where, again, disjointed information was definitely hurting them and it wasn't making apparent what the issue was.
I mean, fascinating and all kind of very like, hey, there's things that you can do tactically, whether it's reactive or proactive, to really improve that margin, kind of recover some of those things, and some of it just bringing that visibility. All right, now we're getting close to time. Travis, I'd love to just have you kind of talk art of the possible. You hit on it at the very beginning of the webinar, but there's so much conversation about what can we do with data? What can we do with AI? And it is coming quickly, like even if you're just using some of the basic generative AI. So maybe talk us through just the art of the possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So, coming at that level one from a generative AI perspective, you're looking at things like Copilot, you're looking at things like ChatGPT, you're looking at ways of just prompting and getting quick answers to things that otherwise would have taken you longer to Google if you knew how to Google it per se, right? So that's kind of the beginning level, is just prompting for more information that maybe you have some context around, but you need to extend it. From there, though, then we start getting into like agentic AI or data agents. Those are going to be things that are going to perform specific tasks for you. Typically, those are embedded within systems that are going to do things like automated quotes or automated customer insights or automated aging or something along those lines. And furthermore, then you have like third-party tools. Again, if we're staying in the Microsoft space, we're thinking about things like Power Automate and the connection with that with Copilot Studio and being able to do prompting, but then force actions behind it. So that's kind of that level 2. But then the AI boosted type of level 3 is going to be centralizing your data, structuring it in a way that you can create machine learning algorithms, things like predictive and prescriptive analytics to help you make those better data-driven decisions. And the best part about generative AI in that space is not only can generative AI extend your data for better machine learning models, but generative AI can also help you build those machine learning models. So no longer is it that you need to have this super experienced expert in machine learning models and complicated things, when generative AI can help you start to build those machine learning models and take more of an 80-20 approach there. Don't let perfect get in the way of good enough is a way that I describe it to people as they're starting their journey here. And then finally, that autonomous analysis and actions. These are things that we're actively working on both for clients and internally. So things like sales enablement is a great example of that. As we centralize and cleanse that data and we start to do predictive and prescriptive analytics, how can we then use all of that data that we've now centralized and curated to automate the decision making and automate the next steps that we need to take, and to prompt our people across our sales area for things that they should be looking out for, or their next steps in the morning. Imagine a world, instead of you trying to come up with, okay, who am I going to sell today? Instead, you have an autonomous agent that's telling you, well, these are probably the most likely next groups that are going to purchase these services, and these are the services you should be going after. So that's really the kind of the path forward from level 1 to level 4.
And where they fall into your segmentation, so what price they should actually get to. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool. And we do see this happening, whether you have a CRM or whether you're using just some generative AI to get basic customer intelligence. We're definitely seeing this used. And I saw in the chat that everybody is using it to some degree, so that's great. We're definitely seeing the adoption continue. All right, crew. So I think, the title of the webinar was Be Proactive. I think that came across like these are strategies and things that you can do today. Regardless of what the economic conditions are, you can do. I'd love to just have everybody say, like, what's one thing that you wish our clients or customers might do to get started on this? David, you're up first.
Yeah, going back to the pricing conversation into some different elements. If you haven't thought about specifically what are the situations in which I'm willing to give better price, write those down. Right. And then you can figure out what that looks like with a team later. The difference between setting a starting price or a gross price from your deal making mechanism of net pricing. Those are usually the two biggest places I start, aside from about your data and how it comes together. Especially if you hear from finance or accounting or IT teams, they're spending a lot of time just getting data together. Asking the question about why to understand it a little bit better can lead you to some very interesting future design discussions.
Agnes, what do you think?
There's a lot of uncertainty in the market right now, and people are reacting to that, or people are waiting. Just because you aren't acting shouldn't mean that you aren't doing the homework. So I would say watch your cash flow and be ready for change, even if that means you're not going to change. I think that because of a lot of uncertainty and the sort of volatility of the market in terms of what's available in capital out there for everyone, how consumers are reacting, how the larger companies are, that's all going to be a factor, but don't wait to make a decision. Make sure that you have the structure in place to know your business so that when push comes to shove, you're ready to make those decisions.
Love it. Makes a ton of sense. Travis.
Yeah, I could speak for tech constantly here, as you've all been informed now. But it doesn't start with tech. It starts with the business decisions. And it's most important, in my mind, your first step is identifying what are the key deliverables, what are the key KPIs, what are those questions that we need answers to, getting those consolidated, prioritized across your different leadership groups, and then start small. Pick your top one. You're going to probably do like a four quadrant matrix of what is the lowest cost but highest value. Identify that quadrant, identify the things that we can execute quickly on, and then don't be afraid to do it manually. Like we've talked about numerous times here, you could start it in Excel. You don't have to put a whole lot of code around it. Or if you're going to start with code, don't do production quality, enterprise-wide type code. Just do an agile approach and let's prove out the value and the concept before we try to build it out into this robust solution.
Awesome. And we are right at time. If anybody on the call does have any questions, would like to talk to one of the team, of course, we are always available. And yeah, be proactive. Take that opportunity to get ahead and put some of these changes in place, build your own capabilities. All right. Thank you, everybody who attended. Great session today.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep. See ya.